Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. My goal is what we've discussed today will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear your comments for this episode about what you're planning on implementing. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Dorie Clark, who's been named a top 50 business thinker in the world by Thinkers 50 and was honored as the #1 communication coach in the world. She teaches executive education at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and the Columbia Business School. She is also the best-selling author of 4 books, including her most recent one, The Long Game. She has also been described by the New York Times as an expert at self-reinvention and is helping others make changes in their lives, one leader at a time. Thank you for joining me today on the program, Dorie.
Hey, Charles, I'm so glad to be here with you. Thanks.
Great. I'd love to begin with you sharing a little bit about your background and how you became the expert in self-reinvention.
Well, it was not intentional. Thank you for the kind question. The reason that I began to learn about reinvention and eventually it became a focus of my work is that actually, probably like a lot of folks, when I was beginning my career journey in my 20s, I hit a lot of roadblocks. I originally thought that I wanted to be an academic. I thought I wanted to be an English professor. And so after I finished my master's degree, which was in theology, I applied to a bunch of different doctoral programs and then got turned down by all of them. So I had to come up with a different plan. So I said, all right, I'll be a journalist. That's kind of similar. There's reading, there's writing. And I did that for about a year, at which point I got laid off. Then there was a big, post 9/11 recession. So I could not get another job as a journalist. And I began working in political campaigns because I had been covering politics. So I sort of knew that space. I proceeded to work for 2 very prominent campaigns, which both of which lost. So I needed to reinvent myself again. There were a lot of starts and stops, which was frustrating, as you might imagine at the time. But post facto, you really learn a lot from the experience. And eventually I settled into what did become my career and has become my career for the past 16 plus years, which is having my own consulting business. I do executive coaching. I teach at business schools, as you mentioned. I write books and give speeches. And along the way, I became fascinated with the question of reinvention because so many people these days do it either voluntarily or involuntarily. I figured that if we want to become the captain steering the ship of our career, we need to understand it better and hopefully be able to do it better. So that was the genesis of my interest in that.
Thank you for providing that insight for our listeners. And I love the approach in many of your books in distilling the secrets that you've learned throughout your journey in such a practical framework. And it really started back in 2013 when you wrote your first published book, Reinventing You, which shares best practices in personal branding and professional reinvention and answers a question that you mentioned, that how can you make big changes and position yourself for a career that you want? And providing that roadmap is really critical and helpful to a lot of people, like you said, that are trying to reinvent themselves because they're not going to stay in the same job forever now. And many times they might be in the wrong job and or career. So what would be your advice for someone starting out on this process and trying to become more deliberate about reinventing themselves or creating their personal brand?
Well, I appreciate that you mentioned both of those things, reinvention and personal branding, in the same breath, because actually, one of the most important insights that I had in the process of thinking about this and researching it and writing Reinventing You is that an essential part of reinvention, if we want to do that successfully, if we want to change jobs or careers or functional areas, or even just change how people view us so that they take us more seriously as a leader as we ascend the ladder, personal brand is a truly critical part of this, which I think sometimes gets overlooked because we need to manage other people's perceptions. And, I don't mean this in some weird Machiavellian way, but the truth is people have an impression of us. And if that is stuck in the past in some way, if they think of you as, oh, well, she was such a nice little intern and they haven't thought about it and now you're like 35, that's probably going to hold you back because you obviously can do a lot more now than you could back then. And you need to make sure that other people have an up to date and accurate impression of who you are and what you can contribute and what you can bring to the table, and also what your interests are. Because a lot, people are not expending a lot of cognitive energy thinking about us. I mean, I wish they were, but they're not. And so it's really like a knee jerk thing about, oh, well, would he be a good candidate for this or would he not? And we need to be telegraphing to people, especially if we want to change, careers or sort of alter the equation in some way. We really need to be signaling. Otherwise, they're going to say, oh, well, he'd never want to do that. And they'll rule us out. They won't even tell us about it. And yet they're making decisions that can impact our future.
You're right. For me, the first step really is that self-reflection, right? When you want to reinvent yourself or be more deliberate with your personal brand, what are some of the tools that people could use in becoming more self-aware and having that time for self-reflection of getting to know what other people might think of them?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. I mean, self-reflection is the starting point, of course, because we do eventually want to be thoughtful about the message we're sending to other people, but we can't be thoughtful about it if we don't even know what that message is. So there's a few things that we can do. I mean, I think a theme that I talk about in The Long Game, my newest book, is actually that a lot of us get caught up, I think, sometimes in the rabbit hole of, like, what's my passion or, something like that, which can become a little paralyzing because if you feel like, I think sometimes I hear from people that they have this kind of all or nothing idea that unless they know what their passion is, they literally can't even take one step forward because, oh, well, until I know what my passion is, I can't dot, dot, dot. And I'm very much a believer that actually it is the reverse. We often find out what our passion is, or if we want to, tick the language down a little, what our interests are, where we want to go. We often find that out through action and through a discovery process. It's not that you sit and, think until an apple hits you on the head and you figure it out. It's that you need to be doing things out in the world. And that shows you in real time with refinements what you like and what you don't so that you can adjust. So I think a lot of it is just finding small experiments for yourself. I mean, it's very much like the lean startup methodology, which probably a lot of your listeners practice in their day-to-day lives. I mean, we understand at the enterprise level, it would be a very bad idea to spend, billions of dollars and many years coming up with a product and never showing it to a customer and then finally unveiling it. Well, the truth is it's just as bad of an idea for you to be, thinking that you need to sit by yourself and that you'll come up with a magic answer for your life and your career by meditating without any data from the real world about what it's actually like to be, an X or a Y or a Z.
Now more than ever, you really need to take that lean startup methodology, have those experiments, iterate and see what works for you. You also mentioned in the book conducting those 360 interviews. Examine your online presence, even going pages deep into the Google searches to make sure that it's conveying the type of brand that you want to put forth in the world, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of ways that we can get data and a really good one, a really simple thing that people can do is to set up a Google alert for their name. Most folks I know haven't done this, but it's easy, it's free. If you don't know how to do it, you can literally type the word Google alert into Google and it will tell you how to do it. But you set it up for your name so that anytime your name is mentioned on the web, you get pinged. And this is really helpful because obviously, if someone has said something nice, you can thank them. That's good. Also, if something goes up that you don't like or it's inaccurate, you can move quickly to address it or to correct it. But you want to begin to get a sense. The truth is, for most of us, we just know too much about ourselves. And as a result, we have this like totally muddled view of what other people think. Other people have a much clearer and simpler view of us, and it's largely shaped by what they see online. So actually taking the time to say, what is out there about me? What impression would I get if I were coming to this, as a blank slate and trying to figure out who is this person? That can be a really useful question to ask.
Love it. That's great. So much to unpack in this book. We don't have time to go through too much, but one other area that I thought that we could just spend a little bit of time on is as you're reinventing yourself, you're trying to develop the skills you need. And the traditional course with lots of people that I know of and have read about is they tend to feel like they need to go back to school when really that should be the last resort you mentioned in the book, not the first thing that you look at. Because you want a job, you go back to school if you have to get that new job that requires specific technical training or a professional license. It's your demonstrated expertise in getting results for your clients that really matter more than having the degrees or the letters behind your name. Can you unpack that a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly I'm a believer in education and I teach at some very good schools, but I often have seen that for many professionals, we have a kind of knee jerk response, which I think has, been sort of plowed into our heads by our parents or by our culture around us, that the answer to every problem is more education, more degrees. And, it's true. The answer to some problems is that, but it's a very expensive answer. And so, if you've got it set up so that you're eager to do it and your employer is going to pay for it, then, God bless, that's great. But if you are actually contemplating, would I like to spend $100,000 or more of my own money? I would urge people to think carefully and to, really ask yourself, all right, if I want to become a better blogger, if that's like the problem that I want to solve, do I actually need an MBA to do that? Or maybe I could buy a $300 course about how to write blogs better. Like, let's see. Maybe try that. So I just want to make sure that we're not killing flies with howitzers because the debt is really the modern scourge for a lot of people that frankly limits our career options. There's a lot of things in life you can't do if you have to make decisions based on paying off extremely onerous debt that you can never cancel. So sometimes it's absolutely worth it and it's the right decision, but I want people to be exceedingly careful in their decision making process up to that point.
Thank you for that. And I think that I've used that methodology as well as I've created a concrete list of skills and knowledge that I should develop. And I find targeted help versus jumping to more general programs that only touches upon what you want to learn because I'm in complete agreement. Education is great in some circumstances, but it shouldn't be the first option. You should look at other options as well and not just go down that traditional route that many people do. And like you said, have a huge amount of debt as a result of it, which may not impact your career as much as you would like. The second book really says now, okay, I've reinvented myself or I'm in the industry that I want to be in. How do I stand out? So once you're in your desired field, how do you stand out and have others recognize your expertise?
Think that sometimes as professionals, we get a little bit tied up or overwhelmed in some way, thinking about, thought leadership with like a capital T and a capital L. And it sounds like this terrifying thing that only a rarefied breed of people are entitled to do. But I really want to break that down because the truth is, wherever you are in your professional career, it is, as you might imagine, very advantageous to be viewed as a creative, innovative thinker, right? I mean, that's just a good brand to have almost no matter what you're doing. And so if you can become known for a particular thing, a particular idea, a particular cause, a particular way of doing things, championing a particular market or something like that, it's really helpful because the problem that we see in so much of corporate life, and this is true for products, that companies sell, it's also true for us as products, is that there's a lot of blah out there. There's a lot of things that it's like, well, it's good, it's fine, but it blends together. If you can be someone that everybody says, oh, she's the one that did blah, 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 blah. Or, oh, he's the one that's always talking about A and B and C, it becomes enormously powerful because people are more likely to remember who you are. You're going to be top of mind for opportunities and people are going to be seeking you out. They're interested, whenever the, thing that comes up that touches on A and B and C, they're going to want to talk to that guy. So I think that it is a worthy endeavor for all of us to say, not necessarily how do I become a thought leader in the sort of, portent view of that, but how can I, this is a very good question. How can I share my ideas more widely? How can I get better known inside and possibly outside my company for my ideas? If we can answer that, that is always going to help your career.
Great questions. And two of the things that you mentioned in your book on really driving this point home and becoming an expert is true thought leaders are driven by asking questions that others have not and questioning assumptions that others take for granted, which are two mindsets, two skills that I think anyone can build. And in your book, you provide lots of questions at the end of every chapter, which I love. What are others overlooking? And if we could, for just a few minutes, go into the outsider's view, because many people, when they reinvent themselves, they don't have the experience, the expertise in that field. So they're thinking that they're an outsider, they don't have much value, and they're discounting that perspective, which really could be impactful and give them a nuanced or a strategic message that people might value and find important. Could you go a little bit into how an outsider can provide value into a field in which they recently got into, or as the process of reinventing themselves has unfolded?
Yeah, absolutely, Charles. And thank you for mentioning the questions at the back of the chapter in Standout. If people are interested, by the way, in getting them for free, I have a free Standout self-assessment that actually helps people think through how they can develop their own ideas and come up with some of this thought leadership. Folks can get it for free if they go to dorieclark.com/join, JOIN, so they can download the Standout self-assessment. But I will also say that you're exactly right, to pinpoint the question about outsiders and outside perspectives, because, we all know this intuitively, right? I mean, we feel kind of nervous coming into a new field because we say, oh my gosh, these other people have so much more experience than I do. I don't really know the ropes here. I'm probably not going to be taken seriously because, what does she know? She's been in consumer packaged goods. What does she know about fintech or, whatever it is? And we're not wrong to worry in the sense that people are often intellectually lazy and they do make assumptions like that. What does she know? And so the truth is we do have to overcome some of that, but it is equally true that we need to recognize something. And in the process of us recognizing it, we can often show it to others, which is, we tend to sort of downplay and, oh, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't know enough about it. Guess what? You have not been spending the last decade sitting on a couch and eating bonbons. You have been doing something. You have been learning something. It is different things, but it actually might be uniquely valuable because it oftentimes is a thing that isn't done in the new industry, a thing that isn't thought about, that isn't talked about. It's sort of like the great William Gibson, but the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. Well, it's often true that between industries, you could be used to doing something in a very particular way, and this other industry hasn't even seen it. And they're like, oh my gosh. So we have to recognize that we may well, these may not be dumb questions to ask. We may well have something profound to contribute. As one example in Standout, I talk about a guy named Eric Schott, who, has become recognized as one of the preeminent biologists of his generation. He's published hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed articles and made some major impacts. But the interesting thing I thought about him was that his background, his training was not in biology. This is actually what proved so effective with him. His background was in math and computer science, and he entered biology late. And in doing so, he had a background where he was able to understand big data at a time when most biologists did not, because they were literally trained on the model of, let's spend my entire career studying one gene. And, genes are a little complicated and the way they interact is a little complicated. So it actually was enormously helpful to have a computer scientist who said, you know what, that's great, but why don't we see how 30,000 of them interact? Why don't we try that? And it turned out he was able to achieve some major breakthroughs because of the different perspective that his training outside the field had shown him.
That's a great story. I also love the story of Paco Underhill in that chapter as well. And really asking those questions. How can you leverage your past training to bring your perspective to your current endeavor? Or what change or trend is most upsetting to the elite in your field? Asking those questions, getting back to that and questioning assumptions is so critical to find that niche in which you can really become an expert and eventually the expert in. And I would argue that then the third question that people always ask when they do this is, okay, now I'm an expert, but how do I make money at it? How do I monetize it?
Yeah. So I love the point that you're raising, Charles, which I think is right on. It absolutely is a important question for all of us to be asking. How can we make a good living doing it? I mean, you don't have to be money obsessed to want to ask that question because at a minimum level, even if your lens is impact, you need to earn enough so you can keep doing the thing. You need to be able to keep having impact. And so finding a way to ensure that what you are doing is sustainable and enables you to be able to spread your message, I think is an incredibly worthy question. And something that I really discovered over time, both in my own experience and through researching it, is that a lot of the ways that we used to think about activities and earning money have really changed pretty dramatically in the past 20 years. And I think we have to shine a light on it because if we don't, some of the assumptions that we might have been brought up with will prove to be kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. Because the truth is, a lot of professions have largely become demonetized. It used to be, oh, well, you can get a job as a journalist and then you can write articles and you can get paid for your articles. Fantastic. Well, of course, there are still some journalists, but I learned I was in the vanguard of this. More than 40% of American journalists lost their jobs over the period from about 2000 to 2015. I mean, it was sort of this decimation of the journalism industry. And meanwhile, you have all of these web properties spring up and they're paying you a big fat goose egg for the contributions that you're doing. It's like, oh, but it's exposure. So all of a sudden, you might be working just as hard. You could say, oh, but I'm writing these articles. Well, maybe you were getting $500 per article before. Now you're getting zero. So what are you going to do about it? And you could sit there and shake your fist at the sky, but I would rather we have a proactive answer. And the proactive answer, the framing of this, the phrasing of this actually comes from a conversation that I had with a journalist and kind of I'll say in air quotes, an internet thinker, an early internet thinker named Doc Searles. And I loved the way he framed this. He said, it used to be that you made money from something, like, oh, you make money from being a journalist. Now, what we need to do is we make money because of something. And, it turns out you might still kind of be operating like a journalist. I mean, I still am. I write plenty of articles. I get paid nothing for them, even though I'm working hard. It's still the same IP. I could be bitter about that, but I am not because actually I'm making a lot more money now than I ever did as a journalist. And that is because I have learned how to make money from it on the back end. So, what I really want for people who are listening to this, whether they're an entrepreneur or whether they work inside of a company but want to get smart about how to create multiple revenue streams for themselves. I mean, asterisk, of course, it needs to be in accordance with your company policies, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a really good way to provide more economic security for yourself. You need to think about the back end. So that in my case, that means I write an article, let's say in the Harvard Business Review or, in Fast Company or one of the other places that I write for. Somebody reads it, they see it, they say, oh, this is great. This is what we need at our company. And so they bring me in for a talk and getting paid for a speech actually is worth a lot more money than just having been paid for the article. So, thinking through like, well, what can I offer? And so creating robust offerings around, whether it's speeches, whether it's consulting, whether it's coaching, whether it's online courses, which I also do. So all of those are things that we need to be thinking through. How do you make money on the back end from free things that have become demonetized over time? It's a new question to ask, but the good news is if we answer it, we can earn even more money.
Thank you for that answer. And I completely agree with that. And I would say to a lot of them that want to reinvent and start making money at this, that they have a short-term perspective. So your new book, The Long Game, really talks to this a lot, that states that the challenge for all of us is an inner one, to keep going when no one is paying attention or cares, and to believe that the world will eventually catch up. And the time frame is in years or in decades, because we overestimate what we can do in a day. We underestimate what we can do in a year, and especially within a decade. So it's having that long term, that long game perspective, which is really going to pay dividends like it is for you, because you worked extremely hard. I've read a lot of your stuff, watch a lot of the podcasts, and if you could just let our listeners know kind of the timing and the time frame of of what you went through initially before you signed your first book deal or laddered up to those first rate publications like HBR and Forbes?
Yeah, thank you, Charles. So, yeah, it was definitely a process. I started my business in 2006, and I realized, fairly shortly thereafter that writing would be a good thing to do. It was both something that I had always wanted to do, to write a book, but also I thought, oh, this is going to be a nice symbol. This is going to be a way that clients can discover me. And so in 2009, I got really serious about wanting to publish a book. So, of course, I completely did it the wrong way because I didn't know what I was doing. So I wrote 3 different book proposals that year because I'm like, one of these will work. And of course, 0 of them worked. And so I had to go back to the drawing board because what I realized was that publishers, yes, they're interested in the idea, but even more than that, they're interested in your platform, which is basically how famous are you? How many followers do you have on social media? How many places do you write for? How many copies can you virtually or literally guarantee will be sold? And so I needed to work on that in a really big way. So even after writing these 3 different book proposals in 2009, no dice, I had to go back to the drawing board for another 2 years and start working on my platform, start building an email list, start writing for different publications. And so finally in 2011, I was able to secure a book deal for my first book, Reinventing You. And then, hey, that's a process. It takes a while for books to come out. So my first book came out in 2013, which was a full 7 years after I started my business. So it really was quite a journey.
Thank you for that. And it's so inspiring too for everyone like myself and other people who don't maybe have the degrees. Maybe they don't have the experience in the field, but with the hard work, with the right focus, with long term thinking, you can achieve your goals regardless of that. So that these barriers have kind of been taken down in a sense when we see a story like yours and the success that you've had. And there's other factors that play here as well, but it's nice and it's definitely more relatable for a lot of individuals, leaders that want to follow a similar path. So one of the things I love about long game too is about one of the virtues, I guess you can call it a virtue that you really kind of detest, but it's the truest test of merit. And that's patience, right? Are you willing to put in the work and do the work, however long it takes, without acknowledgement? Since in this world, everyone wants that drive through breakthrough. They want instantaneous results. They don't want to wait around, especially if the outcome is not guaranteed. How have you developed that over time to really use it to your advantage?
Yeah, thank you. So strategic patience is definitely a theme that I talk about in the long game because, the truth is, for any sensible person, if you have a choice between a great thing now and a great thing later, I mean, duh, take the great thing now. That's definitely what you want to do. But the problem always is that a lot of great things, no matter how much you wish, no matter how much you hope, they just don't come soon. They only can come if you put in time and effort. And the question is, how badly do you want it? And another big problem is that for anything where there's a significant distance between starting and obtaining the thing, there's a lot that can go wrong. There's a lot of, terrain that can change. You don't exactly know how long it's going to take. It's almost, I think the best metaphor that I've come across is that it's almost like entering a dark tunnel and you're just not sure if the tunnel is, 100 feet or 100 miles. And you just have to keep slogging forward. A lot of people under those circumstances, understandably, give up. They just say, oh, it's not worth it, or oh, it's not happening. But for me, one of the tragedies is that along the way, there are definitely some people who end up quitting just short of the finish line because they never realize that they're so close to the finish line. So I've become a big advocate of what I call strategic patience. It's not saying that, patience is, oh, it's a virtue that we should just all be cultivating. I mean, I'd like to throw patience out the window as much as the next guy. I don't want to have it. But the truth is, if we want to live in reality, we do need to have it because that's what enables us to get through that tunnel. It's also strategic patience because it's not, persist for 50 years for no reason. I mean, it's true. Sometimes we discover something is the wrong goal. Or sometimes we discover, it's just not going to happen, right? I want to be a pro ball player and, maybe I'm just, maybe my 3-point shot just isn't quite good enough, whatever it is. But it's important to keep going as long as we can and as long as it's rational, because that is what is going to enable us to get to the goal that we have claimed is so important to us. And so, how do we do it in a rational way? I would say there's two key things that are crucial here. The first is scoping, which a lot of people, a surprising number of people, fail to do. It's just at a really basic level, making sure that at the outset of your journey, you've done research into understanding, well, what's it been like for other people? Like, how long did it take them? And then the second part is what I call looking for the raindrops. Because the truth is, on the way to success, on the way to eventual success, there are these sort of small, quiet indicators of progress. And it's very easy for busy people with their eyes on the prize to overlook them and to say, well, that doesn't count, or, oh, that's not a big deal. But we shouldn't write them off, because those are the signs that we're moving in the right direction. And it could be anything from, starting to get more inquiries about, oh, can you speak? I mean, even if they're free speeches, even if they're for places you would never want to speak, just the fact that they're reaching out says, oh, well, people are paying more attention. Or, maybe it's, unsolicited compliments from clients, or maybe you're starting to get more LinkedIn requests because more people are aware of you. All of those things are small, but it shows you're moving in the right direction. And those are the things that we need to attune ourselves to if we're going to be able to master strategic patience.
Thank you. The other thing that many people struggle with these days is being too busy. There's always something to do, and they use it as a badge of honor because it signals to them maybe higher social status. But if you really want to have a meaningful impact in your life and make some significant contributions, you need to get smart on what you focus on. And I love what you say in the book here is that about what you focus on, because being busy is not a mark of status, it's a mark of servitude. What are some of the first steps people can do to weed out, to clear away those non-essential things, to really focus on the meaningful things that they need to do each day?
Yeah, it's such an important question, Charles. I'll just mention for folks that are interested, I gave a TEDx talk about this topic. It was called Why the Real Reason You're So Busy and What to Do About It. And it got picked up on the TED.com channel, and it's now been seen about 1.5 million times, which is really exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So if anyone wants to check it out, it's short, it's 8 minutes long. You can go to dorieclark.com/TED and check out the talk there. But you're exactly right. I mean, one of the crucial things is there's actually been some super interesting research by Sylvia Bellezza and her colleagues at Columbia University talking about how, especially in American society, although in other places too, busyness has become a kind of status marker. And so even when we claim that we want to be less busy or that we want to get off the hamster wheel, we often don't. We find these kind of subconscious ways to keep ourselves in the rat race. It gives us a sense of worth, so that when we say, how are you doing? Oh my God, I'm just so busy. That's essentially a politically correct way of saying, oh, I'm amazing because I'm so popular. I'm in so much demand, which, if we unpack it, it's a little gross. So I think mostly now that we can become aware of it, it's like, okay, people, let's stop. Let's stop doing that. But yes, it is a very hard habit to break. And I think the most important thing is, first of all, recognizing no one's going to do it for us. We have to set boundaries. It is always going to be in the other person's interest for you to be more responsive to them. If I have a choice, oh gosh, is Charles going to respond to my email in 30 seconds or in 30 minutes? I'll say, well, 30 seconds. Well, that might be good for me. It might be really bad for Charles if he's actually trying to finish a report or an article or something that would really, be meaningful. So we have to be the sort of gatekeepers and deciders about that. But I think even something as small as carving out an hour, or if you can't do that, even a half an hour per week, but really keeping it sacrosanct and using it as planning time to look at your calendar for the next week and to be smart about, just things like, gosh, what can I prepare now so that I don't feel rushed next week? Or, how can I make sure, even just planning things to eliminate some misery. Like if you discover, oh my gosh, I have 7 back-to-back meetings on Wednesday. Is there one you could move so you could actually eat some lunch? Like that would probably dramatically enhance your quality of life. So small things like that can actually help make the difference in a big way.
Let's move back to strategic patience for just a moment and look at the deception phase, which I love this description in the book about the deception phase of exponential growth, where things are moving forward, are growing, but they're so minuscule that people don't notice. And it's often mistaken as there's no growth, there's no movement, there's nothing happening. Your friend Ron Crucci, had that cliche that he told you in the book that there are no shortcuts for success. That cliche that it takes 10 years to be an overnight success is probably true. Can you unpack a little bit that deception phase of exponential growth just to give people more confidence around the fact that they're on the right path, if they have a great feedback network, a strong support group, if they have those raindrops that they know that they're moving in the right direction to stay the course and not deter from that course to go on another course too soon?
This was an idea that I first learned about in reading Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis. Stephen Kotler's a kind of science journalist. Peter Diamandis is a kind of Silicon Valley thinker. He's one of the co-founders of Singularity University, and i- they have done a couple of books together. And specifically, they've talked about what they call exponential technologies, and this could be anything from 3D printing to AI to self-driving cars. And I think it's a useful metaphor because sometimes it's easier to see something in a tangible object or product than it is in our own lives, but the same principles apply. And so if you think about something, for instance, that at one time, now we sort of accept it as, oh, just the way things are. But at one time, digital photography was a perfect example of an exponential technology, right? It keeps getting sharper, better, all of this. And so in the earliest days, it's like, oh, okay, it's like 1 pixel, and then, it's 2 pixels. And, people looking at it in the early days are like, yeah, this is like super not impressive. Like, I know you've been working hard on this, but it's not at all as nice as an actual photograph. So you hear all the hype. It's like, no, but it's going to be great. It's going to be the future. And but the early people looking at it are like, oh my God, this is kind of pathetic, right? And so it would be very easy for people in the early days of creating digital photography to give up, to be like, well, doesn't seem like it's really moving fast enough, and nobody's impressed, and blah blah blah. Blah. But then all of a sudden, you reach a certain tripwire, and all along, the progress has been doubling. That's the nature of exponential technology. It's been, okay, 1 pixel, 2 pixel, 4 pixels, 16 pixels. Oh, and 16 pixels. I mean, we all know from our computers, it's like that's still kind of nothing. But at a certain point, it hits this number where it's like, oh, wait a minute. Like yesterday, it was kind of lousy, but today it's kind of good. Wait a minute. And then it just keeps doubling. And when it hits that barrier, all of a sudden people are amazed. They're shocked. The rate of progress is not any different. It's just further along in the curve. And then all of a sudden, all the skeptics, all the people who couldn't see it before, now they can see it. And it's very much like that with our careers, because you have to put in so much time and so much effort early on to get traction for, the project, the initiative, all the things that you're trying to get going. And for a long time, it feels like, oh man, this isn't going anywhere. I'm not seeing any results. But then you hit it, and it's for people who haven't been paying close attention. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? And that's the reason for strategic patience, is that we need to get through to that other side. That's what's on the other side of the tunnel, is exponential growth and cracking through that deception phase so that other people can see it. And also, frankly, so that we can see it, so that we see the proof of like, oh my gosh, all this hard work, it actually paid off. And that is an incredible feeling when we get to that.
Hopefully, our listeners heard that and is letting that sink in. At the end of the book, you give 3 habits of mind worth cultivating on your journey if you want to be a long term thinker. That's independence, curiosity, and resilience. Is there one more important than the others, or is there one that's more difficult to cultivate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that out of the three, resilience probably is the hardest. I mean, independence isn't easy. I mean, independence of mind, being willing to buck convention. But, there's a lot of people who can muster that. Curiosity is a great trait for all of us to be mindful that we cultivate. But resilience is what undergirds all of it, because the truth is, we can be as independent as we want. We can be as curious as we want. But if we keep getting knocked down and just having detours, having, things not work that we hope will work, having things take longer than we want, it's very easy to interpret that as, as a lot of people do, oh, well, I'm just not cut out for this. Or, oh, I guess it's not meant for me. Or, oh, the universe is telling me that I shouldn't be doing this. You know what? I wouldn't be so sure that what the universe is or isn't telling you. Honestly, sometimes it's just, you know what? You know, there's bad luck sometimes. And it doesn't mean that you are destined not to do something or you're destined for this other thing. It means, you know what? Try it again. And just, we need more at bats. That is the biggest takeaway for me with the long game, is that in order to be successful, you need to try a lot of things, because some of them are going to work, some of them aren't. And if you can keep picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, and pushing forward, you are very likely to obtain a successful result. It may not look exactly the way that you anticipated, but you can get pretty close. You might even get somewhere better.
Thank you for that answer. As we reach the end of this episode, I always like to pose one additional question to my guest: that what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self if you could go back in time and give it, in terms of that reinventing yourself or branding in a more deliberate way?
Well, I think one of the things that I began doing at a certain point in earnest, but I would probably begin even earlier, is content creation. And that is something that, even if you work, again, it's really important for an entrepreneur, because that's how you can kind of signal to the right people to find you as a client or whatever. But even if you work inside of a corporation, I really want to underscore that this is useful. You want to be known for your ideas. And it doesn't necessarily mean writing either. There's a lot of ways to do it. It means things like being willing to raise your hand to present a cool idea at a lunch and learn. It means sharing on your company intranet. It means writing an article for the company newsletter. It means offering to present or writing up a workshop proposal or something at an industry conference. All of those things are really important, because it is a subtle but clear way of showing other people, these are the things that I know about. These are the things where I can be helpful. This is the place where I have expertise. And the more you're conveying that, the more it'll sink in for people. It takes, frankly, a lot of iterations for people to get it. They're like, oh, this is what she's good at. But once you do that, that brand follows you and the benefit accrues over time.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us, Dorie, and thank you for being a part of this episode. Really appreciate it. And let listeners know how they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, Charles, thank you so much. Again, my newest book is called The Long Game: How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And if folks want to check that out, or, get a free self-assessment about, sharpening your own long-term strategic thinking, you can just go to DorieClark.com/the long game.
Thank you, Dorie. And this concludes this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. If you'd like to subscribe, this podcast can be found both on Apple and Spotify. It can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.